team, let's chit chat about how I was distinguishing between the various marks. The thank you card's still going around, so if you haven't signed it, please do so. Ladies in the breakout space, lady and Zoe, I'm doing some notes if you want to move back in, or if you can hear me, then you can stay there. All right. I'm going to be talking both about the microbes and about the human impact assessment schedule because there's a lot of similarities between how we distinguish between achieve, merit, and excellence. So the first thing I want you guys to keep in mind is that you do have the assessment schedule provided for you, so you know what you need to do for your various tasks. As a general sense of what I'm looking for an achieve versus merit versus excellence, the achieve level stuff is looking at not just identifying information, but also describing what happens. And then the other thing is, for the microbes, you need to state a trend in the data. So those are kind of the checkpoints for that. They're looking for abiotic or a biotic factor that affected the microorganisms. The main thing to kind of think about between the difference between the achieved answer and the merit answer is the merit answers start talking about the how and explaining the how. So we're thinking about the process when we're talking about that. So they would actually unpack and tell me about how does the abiotic or biotic factor affect the life process. So there's a mechanism there. That was the key difference between the achieved and the merit level student, was talking about that mechanism. The other thing to keep in mind with the merit level student is that they are thinking about how the environment impacts the pathogen, and there's a direct link between those two things. They're often using words like because and therefore. So it's not just statements of facts. This one here was stating it as facts. So that's the difference between how someone that was an achieve level moved up to the merit level. And let me actually grab for you the two assessments. So you see in this first assessment, the student has described a life process. They're talking about nutrition and the need for nutrition in order to grow and reproduce. So they've described that for me. They've identified it. They've also said that nutrition is affected by temperature and it affects digestion, but they haven't told me the why it does that. So that is where the student is now getting limited to the achieved. They have obviously done an experiment. They have collected primary data. And again, they're seeing the trend in that primary data, but they haven't explained why that trend is there. And again, they talk about the environment, but they don't link it back. Or sorry, they talk about the temperature, but they don't link it to the environment that the pathogen is growing in. So that's why this student here was limited to an achieved, is because there is no explanations in this first one. In the merit level one, you can see that they do have temperature as well, being specific to the environment, and they are talking about it. But in this case, they're talking about how temperature affects respiration, and they're using the word because, and they're talking about how the reason why it's going to affect the respiration of my microorganism is because it affects the enzyme activity. So now they've explained the why. So temperature affects my microorganisms, achieved. It affects it because it's going to influence the activity of the enzymes. Now you're getting up to the merit level. And on top of that, they've included a graph to explain as the temperature increases, we see the enzyme activity is also increasing. That's related to particle theory and the movement of particles. And they need to have collision in order to react, and they need to have enough energy for that reaction to occur. However, you hit a certain point where the optimal temperature is now reached, because after this point, my enzymes start to break down, they denature, they lose their shape, and now they are not working anymore. So you can save yourself a lot of words by using images. So keep that in mind. But this student here has actually given me the explanation to what is going on and why it's happening. So that's why this one's at a merit and the other one was at achieved. Any questions so far? All right. For the excellence, the way I like to describe what excellence is explaining the why. So this explains the how, the mechanism. This explains the bigger picture to what's going on and the reasoning. With this one here, the other thing we are looking for the excellence is that you understand the interconnectedness of the relationship. So, for example, the pathogen lives in an environment. That environment affects the pathogen. The pathogen has life processes. Those life processes, in turn, affect the environment. So this here is actually showing the wider linkage between everybody. It's not looking at it in a static, that one to that one. It's looking at the whole picture. That's the extended abstract, and that's the excellence. So in this excellence level work, they have provided some data. We're talking about nutrition again and digestion. That's a life process. But now they're talking about how the energy of the cells produced to sustain life, that energy also produces heat, which is a byproduct on the process. So they're talking about how a life process, respiration, affects the environment by changing the heat of the environment because it releases heat. They also talk here about basically what is a positive feedback loop. So if I'm heating up my environment, my enzymes are working faster, so then it's going to be digesting more. So so that's something to think about. The other thing here is they talk about a second factor. They talk about food availability and how that affects the life process. This one's also talking about nutrition affecting temperature. They have, like I said, another graph. But the key difference between this guy here is that they understand that the pathogen affects the environment. It's not just the environment affecting the pathogen. Are we okay with that? All right. So just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at for achieve merit and excellence. I will also talk about the human impact one because there's a lot of similarities with how we're marking it. Again, the achieved is just a regurgitation of facts, describing the human activity, the change in the system, the relationship. That's all achieved. Merit, however, is again explaining the how, the mechanism, the steps that are occurring. Excellence is explaining the why, and in this case, the interconnectedness is the main thing that we're looking for. So, for the ones that we're looking at the human impact, this one was talking about deforestation, and they're just stating a lot of facts about deforestation, but they're not actually telling me and unpacking the reasons to why. So like, trees provide food and housing for the animals, and when that's taken away, there's no place to go. Well, explain to me more about what that means. Why is it the housing? Oh, they put their bird's nests in there. That's unpacking it for me. When there's no trees covering the sediment, it can easily be blown away into the waterways. Why? Talk about erosion. So this is why this one's at the achieved. All right, and that's just the same thing that I had unpacking. Here's my merit. What did I say? This one here hasn't, for the merit level, hasn't linked the spheres to show interconnectedness. So in this case, this is a merit level student. They are talking about deforestation as well, but now they're actually giving me the depth to explain the why it is a problem. So they say, without roots holding the soil together, the dirt debris can easily get pulled along with the flowing water, causing blockages, which water can build up behind and flood even higher. Do you see how that one's actually giving me the reasons why, whereas this one just tells me it can be easily blown away into waterways? Yeah, hopefully. So that is what I'm talking about. There's actually the mechanism why. This here is actually including the science ideas. They talk about evaporation and condensation, and they're talking about the atmosphere, potentially the hydrosphere, depending on the lens you're looking at it. But the issue with this one, compared to the excellence level, is that this one does not interlink all the spheres together. A big part for the excellence for the human impact one is that you are actually talking about multiple spheres and showing that they're interconnected. So this one here talks about carbon dioxide and how that affects temperature, and the sun heats up the Earth's surface. And then they're going to start going into the greenhouse gases. They keep us warm. And then where is it? Heat transfer. And there we go. Now they're talking about the sea getting warmer. Now they've gone from talking about the atmosphere to the hydrosphere. And they're showing there's a linkage between the atmosphere and the hydrosphere. That's why that student is now getting excellence, because they can realize that there's actually more layers than just the one that they were looking at. So that's kind of the things that I'm looking for. This one actually explains the process with the science ideas. So that's why this one, even though it is shorter, is a better quality. So don't think that word count is going to be the deciding factor. I'm also very mindful that a lot of you guys, or that you guys rank this at excellence because you thought, oh, there's pictures in here. And those pictures are helpful. This would definitely have helped this guy if they had some pictures in there. But the words don't make up for it. Now, a piece of advice that I got when I was listening to the workshop recordings on the standard was that if you choose to do Google Slides for any assessment, you are probably going to be limiting your grade to a merit, because these Google Slides don't allow you to have the same depth of unpacking as a written report. So do keep that in mind when you guys have choices on how you present your work, because that can influence then your grade very simply. The other thing to keep in mind is that I will be putting a word limit on here. So pictures are going to be really, really important to cut down on the number of words you're using. You can communicate a lot with a picture. So like I was saying with, where are you? Hold on. Not that one. I think it was the merit one. Here we go. This one here tells me exactly what's happening with enzyme activity without me having to write a whole paragraph in there. Okay? So think about those things. Human impact people, I will have you guys write a letter to someone in government about something that you are concerned about. So you will be working in written format like this, so you don't have to worry about the slides. Micros people, I will give you guys a choice on how you want to present your report, so you do need to factor that in with how it's going to limit potentially how much you can communicate. Okay? Cool. That's us. Let me know if you have any questions. You can keep those papers if you want, or you can give them back to me.